Hello and welcome to my channel. If you're new, my name is Andrea and I do lots of fun Dollar Tree DIYs and home decor on a budget. And today I'm sharing 15 spring and summer Dollar Tree DIYs. These are all DIYs I've shared in videos this year already, but if you're new, you may have missed some of them. And I also thought it would be useful just to have all of them in one place. So I hope you enjoy all of these DIYs, and let's get crafting. For my first Dollar Tree spring DIY, I'll be making this floral flower pot. You will need a small terracotta pot from Dollar Tree, some floral napkins, Mod Podge, and white acrylic paint. I'm starting with painting the pot white using a foam brush, and I ended up doing 3 coats to cover the whole pot. I'm taking one of these floral napkins I found at Dollar Tree and unfolding it. I'm now cutting out all of the flowers and I'm mixing it up, so sometimes I'll just have a single flower by itself and then other times I'm grouping a few of them together. There is also another layer to these napkins, which you'll want to make sure to peel off. I'm cutting out all the flowers, so not much of the white space is left showing, but you could leave that if you wanted to, especially if you painted your pot white. I'm now applying some Mod Podge with a foam brush to the areas where I'm going to be placing the flowers. And I'm pressing the flower onto the pot and then smoothing it down with my fingers and then adding another layer of Mod Podge on top. I found sometimes if I was a little bit too rough with the foam brush, then I would rip some of the paper napkin. So just be careful with that, but you can always press it back down with your fingers. I'm just placing all these flowers around the pot and doing a mix of the larger sections and some of the smaller flowers. Now I'm going to let this dry for an hour or so before adding another layer of Mod Podge over top of all the flowers. Now that the final layer of Mod Podge has dried and all the flowers have set onto the pot, it's time to put in these fake flowers from Dollar Tree. And that is our finished floral pot. For my next Dollar Tree spring DIY, I'm going to be making this blue speckled mason jar vase. You'll just need a mason jar, some blue acrylic paint, along with some brown and black acrylic paint, and some twine. To start off with, I'm painting my mason jar with the blue paint, and I ended up having to do 4 or 5 coats to get the opacity that I wanted on the jar. To get the speckled look, I'm mixing some brown and black acrylic paint with an old toothbrush, and then I'm getting the paint all over the toothbrush and then using my finger to flick the paint off the toothbrush onto the mason jar. I'm now wrapping some thin twine all around the top of the mason jar and securing it in place with hot glue. I'm just using some scissors to trim off some of the excess little threads from the twine. And here is the finished speckled mason jar. And now it's time to add in some flowers. I got these bunches of baby's breath from Dollar Tree and I'm putting them in here. I think the white and the blue look so pretty and so springy together. My third Dollar Tree spring DIY is this Farmhouse flower bucket. You'll need one of these silver flowers and garden buckets from Dollar Tree, along with some black and white acrylic paint, floral foam, and some nautical jute rope. I'm using a foam brush to paint 4 coats of this white acrylic paint onto the metal bucket. I'm now taking a piece of sandpaper and lightly going over top of the paint just to give it a bit more of a rustic look, to have some of the silver shining through. I started going over the letters that say flowers and garden with a thin Sharpie, but it started to not really work that well after a while. So instead I took a thin paintbrush and some black acrylic paint, and I'm using that to paint over top of the letters. I'm taking this nautical rope from Dollar Tree and cutting off a strand that is just long enough to wrap around the bucket once, and then I'm gluing it in place with some hot glue. Now I'm placing the block of floral foam inside, and it's time to add in all of the flowers. I got these flowers at Dollar Tree, and I'm just cutting off the stems with some wire cutters and then poking them into the foam. You can add as many different flowers as you want and arrange them in lots of different ways to suit whatever color scheme you want. I'm just using these white flowers with a little bit of greenery, and then I'm filling in all of the empty spaces with this reindeer moss. For my next Dollar Tree DIY, I'm making this burlap covered vase with lavender. I'm using this candle holder from Dollar Tree, along with some leftover burlap I had from Dollarama, and this lavender also from Dollar Tree. Since I'm working with leftover burlap scraps I had laying around, I'm cutting it with scissors and just folding it around this candle holder to make it fit, and then I'm gluing the sides together. The idea is to kind of make it look like a little burlap sack. Then I'm just putting the lavender inside and taking a piece of thin jute cord and tying a bow around it. This DIY boho macrame wall hanging is made with supplies from Dollar Tree. I'm using one of the metal wreath forms from Dollar Tree, and I'm separating the rings using wire cutters. I'm using the smallest ring for this DIY and spray painting it rose gold with spray paint from Michaels. I'm using this cotton twine from Dollar Tree to make the macrame section of this wreath. I cut 34 strands of twine that were 40 inches long each. I'm folding a piece of the string in half, then placing it underneath the wire wreath with the folded part toward me. Then I'm taking the ends of the string and putting them over the wire through the loop and pulling tight. This is called a lark's knot. I'm continuing to do this knot with all the strands of twine all along the bottom of the wreath. Now that all the lark's knots are complete, I'm making square knots, which use 4 strands each. I'm taking strand number 1 and putting it over strands 2 and 3 and under strand 4, making an L shape. Then I'm taking strand 4 and putting it under strands 2 and 3 and under strand 1, pulling it up through the loop. Pull on strands 1 and 4 on either side to tighten the knot. Then take strand 4 on the right and fold it over strands 2 and 3 and under strand 1. Then take strand 1 and put it under strands 2 and 3 and under strand 4, pulling it up through the loop. Now pull on the 2 strands on either side to tighten, and that is 1 square knot complete. Continue these steps for all the strands until you have square knots all across your whole wreath. Once this row of square knots is complete, I'm going to make another row, but this time I'm only going to put the knots part way up. Again, fold strand 1 over strands 2 and 3 and under strand 4. Tuck strand 4 under strands 2 and 3 and under strand 1, pulling up through the loop. This time, when tightening, don't tighten the knot all the way up to the top. I stopped mine a couple inches down from the previous square knot. Then take strand 4 and fold it over strands 2 and 3 and under strand 1. Take strand 1 and tuck it under strands 2 and 3 and under strand 4, pulling up through the loop. Tighten the strands, pulling up to the first part of the knot. And repeat these steps all along the rest of the strands. For the last row, we're going to be making more square knots, but this time we'll be skipping a couple of strands. Push the first 2 strands off to the side because for this square knot, we're going to be starting with the 3rd strand. Now that those strands are out of the way, we're just going to be repeating all the same steps as before. Again, I'll be tying these square knots so they don't go all the way up to the previous knots, but so they're a couple inches down. And once you've tied all the square knots all the way across, you should have 2 strands on either side that are not part of the knots. Now that all the knots are done, I'm untangling all the strands and making sure they're laying flat so I can trim them. I'm cutting the strands into a slight V shape at the bottom. I got these flowers from Dollarama and I'm cutting them with wire cutters, then using floral wire to attach them to the wreath. You could arrange the flowers any way you want, whether it's all around the whole circle, on the bottom, or on the sides. I'm focusing the flowers just on the left side of the wreath. Here is the finished Boho Macrame Dollar Tree wall hanging. This could easily fit with any season depending on which flowers you choose. This floral wreath is made using just a hula hoop from Dollar Tree, spray paint, and some fake flowers. I got the smaller hula hoop from Dollar Tree, and I'm separating it and dumping out all the little beads inside because I don't want those rattling around. I had started spray painting the hula hoop before realizing I hadn't taken off the outer sticker yet, so I'm peeling that off now, then spray painting the hula hoop gold. I'm using floral wire to attach these flowers and leaves to the hula hoop. You could cover the entire thing in flowers. That would look really pretty. I decided I'm only going to have flowers on the left side of the hoop because I like that look. I chose soft, pretty boho colored flowers, but you could change it up depending on the season or your style. This type of wreath is so customizable and so easy, which I love. I'm using some jute cord to attach the hula hoop to my wreath hanger. Since the flowers are all on one side, it really wanted to fall, so the flowers were on the bottom. To keep it in place how I wanted it, I found it easier to just tie the wreath to the hanger. If you have any tips on another way to get it to stay in place, let me know. Here is the finished Dollar Tree hula hoop wreath. This is such a statement piece, and I think it looks so pretty. I love how it turned out. For this DIY, we'll be making a wooden planter box with some painted stencils and fake succulents. I'm using this wooden box I got from Dollarama. It actually came with some drawers inside, but I took those out for this DIY. And I'll also be using some brown acrylic paint. These stencils I got at Dollar Tree, along with some succulents and Spanish moss. To start with, I'm mixing some of the brown paint with water, and I'm doing this to give the box more of a stained wood look. I'm going all around and painting all the sides with this paint and water mixture. After the first coat, I realized I had forgotten to sand it, so I quickly went over and sanded the whole thing, and luckily it didn't take off too much of the color, so that wasn't a problem. And now I'm adding another coat all around to each side. I'm also painting the inside of the box, even though you're not actually going to see any of this because I'm covering it all up with moss, but I just thought it made it look more finished and it wasn't too hard to do. Now I'm placing these stencils I got at Dollar Tree onto the front of the box. I have a bird, a butterfly, and then some flowers with another little butterfly. I'm using a foam brush with some pink, yellow, and blue acrylic paint. Once the paint is all dry, I'm peeling off the stencils, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think they look really cute. Now I'm taking the Spanish moss and just stuffing it inside of each of the 3 compartments. Then I'm adding in 1 succulent to each of the sections. And here's the finished succulent planter box. Super easy and super affordable. For this DIY, we'll be making this spring bunting, perfect to add to your mantle or anywhere in your home. I'll be using this burlap I got at Michael's, and now I'm using a ruler and a pencil to draw out all the triangles for the bunting. I first drew a horizontal triangle on the burlap, as you might be able to see, but then I switched to drawing vertical ones so I could fit more on the burlap without wasting space. Each of my triangles are about 3.5 inches wide by 4.5 inches long. I'm making 6 triangles to fit the word spring. To make the bunting more sturdy, I'm mixing some Mod Podge with water and brushing it all over my burlap. I did this over top of 2 scrap pieces of paper, so I didn't make too much of a mess. I let it dry overnight, and now you might be able to tell it's more stiff and not so flimsy as burlap usually is. So this will make it a lot easier for making the bunting. Now it's time to cut out all the triangles. I'm making some stencil letters with my Cricut, but you could always freehand it with acrylic paint, or you could use some stencils or letters from the dollar store. Anything is totally up to you. I measured on the triangles how big I wanted the letters to be, so now I'm just adjusting those sizes. I ungrouped the letters so I can manipulate them all separately. To create the stencil, I'm going to need a shape behind each of the letters. And I could have chosen a triangle, whatever, I just went with a square. I changed the color of the square to make it easier to see. I'm going to select the box with the letter and then hit slice. And now I can pull away each of the layers and I'm left with what you can see looks like an S stencil. I continued slicing all the letters and these are the stencils that we're left with. Click on Make It, then select Premium Vinyl as the material. Now that all the stencils are cut out, I'm going to peel it off the mat and weed them out. Now, normally when you're weeding, you want to get rid of all the negative space and you'll be left with your letter or image. But for a stencil, we want to take out the letter, so we're just left with the box around it. I cut out a small piece of this Duck brand contact paper, and once I cut out each of the letters, I'm going to peel off the contact paper and stick it on. I'm using my Cricut scraper tool to press the contact paper down onto the vinyl, and now I'm peeling the white backing off so the vinyl is stuck to the clear part, then pressing that onto the burlap. I'm using my scraper tool again just to make sure the vinyl is really stuck down to the burlap, and it also helps when peeling off the clear part because you don't want to take up the black vinyl as well. Now I'm taking a foam brush and some acrylic paint and painting on the stencil. I'm going to keep repeating all the same steps for each of the letters, pressing down the contact paper and transferring it to the burlap. The paint colors I chose for my stencils are purple, yellow, pink, and blue. I will say the purple doesn't show up as well on the burlap as the other colors, just because the purple is darker and not as bright. So if I was to do it again, I might stick with the yellow, pink, and blue. Once all the paint is dry, I'm peeling off the stencils and I'm left with the letters. To make holes in each of the triangles in order to hang them up, I'm using my Cricut weeder tool and just poking through and making 2 holes per triangle. Once I did this on one of the triangles, I used it as sort of a template to line up with the other triangles to try to get the holes in the same places on each of them. I'm using this cotton twine from Dollar Tree to string all of the triangles together. I did wrap a piece of tape around the end of the twine to make it easier to pull through the holes. I'm starting on the back side of the triangle and pulling through and then across, and this gives you a bit of the string across the top of the triangle, but if you didn't want that, you could start the opposite way from the front and go behind. Sometimes I did have to go back with the weeder tool and poke through the hole again just to make it a little bit bigger and easier to get the string through. And here's the finished spring bunting. I love the colors of this. I think it's so simple but so fun. For this DIY, we're making 2 of these dollar store topiaries. I'll be using 2 of these 1.5-inch styrofoam balls, along with these 2 moss balls, some moss, a wooden dowel rod from Dollarama, and some white glue. The styrofoam balls will be the tops of both topiaries, so I'm using a pencil to make a hole in the bottom. Then I'm pushing the dowel rod through just to make the hole bigger, and this way I know where to glue the moss onto the ball. I'm squeezing some white glue onto the styrofoam ball, then spreading it around with a foam brush. And I'm taking clumps of this dollar store moss and sticking it onto the ball. There really is no rhyme or reason to any of this. I'm just taking pieces of the moss and sticking it all over the styrofoam ball, trying to cover up all the white spaces. You could also use a hot glue gun for this. I found the white craft glue worked really well, so that was fine with me. And that way you don't get all of the little glue gun strings hanging everywhere, which is nice. As you can see, I'm just gluing all the moss all around and avoiding the hole at the bottom. I'm now taking a piece of floral foam and cutting it down to fit inside this plant pot. These came in a set of 3 at Dollarama, and I'll just be using 2 of them today. And I'm painting them with this gray spray paint. Along with the styrofoam moss ball that I made, I'm also using these moss balls from the dollar store just to give the topiaries a bit of a different look, some variety. And again, I'm using a pencil to make holes in the moss ball. Then I'm going in with the rod and sticking it through the ball. Now I'm poking this dowel rod into the floral foam and then adding the moss ball we made earlier to the top. And now I'm using this Spanish moss to fill up the pot and cover up the floral foam. I have this burlap lace ribbon I got at the dollar store, and I'm cutting off a piece and wrapping it around the planter. Now I'm just hot gluing it in place. Then I'll take a piece of jute twine and make a bow and glue it on the front of the burlap ribbon. I ended up making 2 identical topiaries, and this is the final result. If you can't find any of the finished moss balls, you could always make both of them with different sized styrofoam balls or different colored moss. Whatever you can find, that will work. For this DIY, we're making a wood dowel vase. I had this plastic container left over from some wood beads, and I'm also using these craft dowels from the dollar store. To start off with, I'm cutting down my plastic container so it's a bit smaller than the dowel rods. And then I'm hot gluing each of the rods onto the plastic tube. You want to make sure the first few rods are really straight because those will determine what the rest of the dowels look like. And now I'm just continuing all around my tube until the whole thing is covered in the wood dowels. I used 59 of the dowels to cover the whole surface, but of course this will depend on what size of vase you're using. And if you don't have any leftover plastic tubes like this, you could always use a glass vase, or you could use a leftover jar or can. Really, anything you have laying around will work. Now I'm spray painting my vase with this blush pink chalk paint. I gave it a couple of coats to cover the whole thing. Now I'm adding in these pink and white flowers from the Dollar Tree to finish it off. And here is the finished wood dowel vase. Depending on what color you use for the spray paint, you could totally change the look of this if you wanted something dark and modern, or more of a coastal feel, or boho. Anything would work. This is such a versatile piece. For this DIY, I'm going to be making a summer-themed wreath full of sunflowers and butterflies. To start with, I'll be using one of these metal wreath forms from Dollar Tree. It's missing a couple of rings that I took off for previous DIYs. And I'll also be using this burlap I got at Michael's. I'm now wrapping the burlap around the wreath form, and I'm going to be hot gluing it in place as I go. Every time I wrap the burlap around the wreath, I pull it to the side a little bit so it's at more of a diagonal, and then I'm continuing all around until the whole thing is covered. I got this wooden truck at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be painting it using this green paint from Walmart. I also mixed some white acrylic paint in with the green to make a lighter green color, because I'll be painting some parts of the truck with the lighter color and some parts with the darker color. Going in with the darker green and painting all the main parts of the truck. And now I'm painting the center of the wheels with this silver gray color, then painting the tires black. For the back of the truck, I'm using this burnt umber mixed with some of the white acrylic paint. Then I'm using just the burnt umber by itself for that center part there. Now I'm just arranging the truck on the wreath along with the flowers to see whereabouts I want it to go. And now I'm gluing all the flowers to the back of the truck, then gluing the truck down onto the wreath. I got these cute bee stickers at Dollar Tree, and I'm taking the watering can sticker and putting it on the door of the truck. I'm also using these laser cut butterflies I got at Dollar Tree. They are so cute, so detailed and intricate, and I'll be painting 2 of them pink and 1 of them yellow. Painting them was a little bit tricky just because it's so intricate and there's all these little crevices everywhere. But I just went over with my paintbrush and did a first coat and then went back over and kind of got in between all the little crevices as much as I could. And now I'm gluing them down onto the wreath. I'm taking 3 of these larger sunflowers. I got all the sunflowers at Dollarama, and I'm placing them on the bottom of the wreath. At first I tried to just poke them through the burlap, but then later on, I decided to secure them even more with some hot glue. I'm now taking this burlap ribbon I got at Walmart and tying it around the top of the wreath. And here's the finished burlap sunflower wreath, perfect for summer. I love the colors with the bluish green and the yellow, and then the little pops of pink from the butterfly. This DIY is a bright, fun, colorful floral wreath. I'm using a floral foam wreath form from Dollar Tree along with a bunch of bright, fun flowers from Dollarama. I love these flowers because they also include a few little butterflies, which is fun. I'm taking my wire cutters and cutting off all the stems and then poking them through the wreath. The great thing about these foam wreath forms is that they're so easy to poke things through and arrange however you want. I'm using a variety of flowers, anything that is bright and bold. I'm also mixing in a couple of white flowers, and I arranged everything so the 2 butterflies are on either side of the wreath. I used some of this floral wire to help tie down some of the pieces, like this large leaf. You could also use hot glue. I'm turning over the wreath and just making sure nothing is sticking out too far, folding over the stems or trimming them off as needed. To hang the wreath, I'm taking this jute cord from Dollar Tree and making a loop at the top. And I'm securing it to the wreath using hot glue. I wanted to make a little banner in the center of the wreath to have the word welcome on it. So I'm using this burlap ribbon from Walmart, and I'm cutting it to be the right size to go across the wreath. I made a stencil that said welcome using my Cricut. And if you want to see a more detailed video on how I make stencils with my Cricut, then I'll link another video up in the cards and also down in the description box. I'm weeding out the word welcome and being very careful not to take the little tiny pieces along with it, including the center of the E and also the O. I actually used the Dollar Tree vinyl for this, and I didn't notice any difference between this and Cricut vinyl, so that was nice. And I'm also using the Dollar Tree transfer paper and laying that over top of my stencil and then transferring that to the burlap ribbon. This transfer paper was really sticky and I thought it worked really well. Now I'm peeling the stencil up with my transfer paper, then sticking it onto the burlap. This part was definitely the trickiest, trying to remove the transfer paper from the burlap and the vinyl. I'm not sure if it was because the transfer paper was too sticky or if it's just because of the font and how small it was, but I did get it to work with some patience and using my Cricut tools to press down on the vinyl as I was peeling up the transfer paper. You really want to be careful not to lose these little pieces inside the letters since we are going to be painting over top of this and using it as a stencil. But if those little pieces come up, it's no problem. Just take one of your little tools and stick it back in place. Now that I have my stencil all ready to go, I'm taking some white acrylic paint and a paintbrush and painting over the letters. I did a couple of coats of this, but I wish I had maybe done a little bit more because it wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it to be when I peeled off the stencil. I'm now going back with my paintbrush and going over the letters with a little bit more of the white paint just to darken it up. And it's obviously better if you do this while the stencil is still on, but it still worked out pretty well. Now it's time to attach the burlap ribbon onto the wreath. I'm taking my hot glue gun and attaching the ribbon to either side. Here is the completed summer-themed floral wreath. I loved this wreath on its own with all the colorful flowers, but I think adding the welcome banner in the center took it to the next level. I love how the burlap looks with the white lettering, and I think it complements the bright flowers really well. For the first carrot DIY, I'll be making this large farmhouse twine carrot. You'll need aluminum foil, twine, reindeer moss, masking tape, and lace ribbon. First, I'm ripping off a piece of aluminum foil and rolling it into a tube, pressing it together at the bottom to give it a tapered carrot shape. I'm now taking another piece of foil and wrapping it around to make the carrot a little thicker. And I'm adding another piece of foil, but this time I'm only wrapping it around the top of the carrot just to make that part a little wider. I'm taking some masking tape and wrapping it all around the aluminum foil to make it easier for the twine to stick to it and also to help give the carrot a little more shape. I'm now using hot glue to attach the twine to the foil carrot, wrapping it around until the whole thing is covered. I will be going back over and adding more layers of twine, so you don't need to worry if there are any little blank spots. I'm adding more layers of twine to the carrot, making sure to add more to the top where I want it to be thicker. I'm going to use this reindeer moss as a carrot topper. I'm using hot glue to keep it all together because the reindeer moss can make a bit of a mess, but I'm just adding more glue and then pressing down the moss to make the carrot top. I'm taking this burlap lace ribbon I got at Dollar Tree and ripping off just the lace part, then gluing it around the carrot. And I made a little bow with some of the jute twine and I'm gluing that onto the lace. For the next carrot DIY, I'm going to be making this flower arrangement with some little carrots tucked in. I will be using this Flowers and Garden bucket from Dollar Tree, which I made in a previous video, and I'll link that below so you can see how I painted and distressed it. But I took out the flowers I had in there before, and I'll be replacing them with some new ones and giving it more of an Easter vibe. I'm also using these little glitter carrots from Dollarama, along with some white and silver acrylic paint, some twine, and a bunch of these fake flowers I found at Dollar Tree. These little carrots are very glittery, so I'm taking a little piece of sandpaper and sanding off as much of the glitter as I can. I definitely didn't get all of it, but I did as much as I could. To start with, I'm taking this gray silver paint and brushing it onto the carrot. I also removed the green tops from the carrots because I won't be needing those for this DIY. I had to do a few coats of the gray paint to make sure the whole carrot was covered, and at this point it's kind of looking more like a strange gray pine cone, but stick with me, we're going to turn this into a carrot. Now that all the gray paint is dry on the carrot, I'm taking a brush and painting on some white acrylic paint over top. To make the carrot toppers, I'm wrapping the jute around my fingers 15 times, then cutting it off and using another piece of twine to wrap around near the top. Then I'm cutting through the loop to make the tassel, which will become the carrot topper. I'm putting a dollop of hot glue on top of the carrot, then adding my tassel on top. I'm now using some wire cutters to cut off some of the branches of these fake flowers, which I'll be sticking into my flower bucket. For my next carrot DIY, I'm making another twine one, but this time I'm making a smaller carrot and using a different technique. I'm taking some of this tissue paper I found at Dollar Tree, along with some twine and a piece of greenery I took off a bunch of fake flowers. I'm folding the tissue paper into a square and then folding it into a triangle, and then I'm folding it again into a smaller triangle, and now I'm rolling it up, and I'm trying to make it somewhat into a carrot cone shape where it's smaller on the bottom and then larger on the top. Then I'm taking some masking tape and wrapping it all around the tissue paper. I'm really using the masking tape to help me shape the tissue paper into a carrot. So I have the larger bit on top and then going to more of a point at the bottom. And now using some hot glue, I'm attaching the twine to the carrot and wrapping it all around until the whole thing is covered. And again, I'm going to be doing a couple layers of the twine. I'm adding a little dollop of glue at the top and then sticking in this bit of greenery for my carrot top. And now I'm finishing up the top of the carrot here, just wrapping the twine all around, making sure all of the masking tape is covered, then going back around and doing another layer of the twine over the carrot. And I'm making sure that I have more twine at the top and less at the bottom to get that tapered shape. I ripped off another piece of this lace from the Burlap lace ribbon, and I'm kind of pressing it together onto the carrot with some hot glue to make it look like a little bow. Next, I'll be making this no-sew farmhouse fabric carrot. For this DIY, you'll need a piece of fabric. I'm using this gray and white baby blanket from Dollar Tree, some twine, and hot glue. To start, I'm cutting out a square piece of the blanket. Fold the square in half, then cut diagonally from the bottom right corner up to the top left corner. This will make 2 triangles, each of which can be made into a carrot. Roll the fabric into a cone shape, then hot glue in place. You could also sew this if you wanted to, but if you're not into sewing, then gluing works just fine. I'm folding over the edges of the fabric to give it a cleaner look, then gluing everything in place. Make sure when you're gluing to leave the center of the cone hollow because we're stuffing it with more fabric. I'm taking scraps of the same fabric, rolling it up, and stuffing it inside the cone. You could also use pillow stuffing or anything else you have to stuff the carrot. To make the carrot topper, I'm using twine and wrapping it around my hand 30 times, then cutting it off. And I'm taking another piece of twine and wrapping it around the top of the loop, then cutting through the loop to make a tassel, which will become the carrot top. I'm gluing the tassel into the top of the carrot and folding the fabric around the tassel. I'm also taking another piece of twine and making a bow to tie around the top of the carrot. Please give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments which of all of these DIYs was your favorite. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends, and I'll see you next time.